According to Google, the oldest person in history was 122 years old. But in the Bible, characters such as Noah, Jared, and Methuselah, and this guy lived over 900 years. How is this even possible? And why have we stopped living for so long? These are a few questions I used to ask myself quite a lot. So I did some digging and I found a few interesting answers. Before the flood of Noah, most biblical characters lived around 900 years. And this is the longest that we get to see man live throughout the entire Bible. Some people argue that maybe they followed a different calendar or time system back in the day that could have been off by a multiple of 10. For example, someone like Noah who lived to 950 would have been 95 years old in our age. Which kind of makes sense, but if you read on, you'd see that at age 100, Seth had a child, and Enosh at age 90 had a child as well. So according to this calendar theory, Seth had a child at age 10, and Enosh had a child at age 9, which doesn't really make sense. But later on, we're going to get to a verse where God says that he would reduce man's days to 120 years. So the calendar theory doesn't really make sense, because you'd have to take into account man's lifespan being reduced to 120 years. So if they got reduced to 120 years, and you use the calendar theory, the 120 would be something like 1,2 or a year in the tens, going at a maximum of 10 years in our age, which is completely absurd because people live past 20, 30 years old. Now, another explanation that I find much stronger than the previous one is that the human beings that lived all the way back then were much closer to God's original creation. Don't get me wrong, we're all fearfully and wonderfully made in God's image, and he created you exactly how he wants you to be. The point I'm making is that Adam and Eve were created in a world that had not yet experienced genetic decline, disease, or the full effects of sin. As humanity multiplied and centuries passed, the consequences of living in a fallen world kind of stacked upon itself. Genetic mutations, sicknesses, environmental hardships, and the corruption brought by sin gradually took a toll on the human race, which kind of does make a bit of sense. Now, the last point in which I agree with the most is Genesis 6 verse 3. And then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. This verse was quite confusing to me. When you look at it in direct context, the verse seems to be saying that God will not let humans live such long lives, because the normal lifespan of the human was too long, given the evil that was taking place on earth. Considering how much evil man is capable of within a lifetime of less than a century, the capacity for evil over many centuries, such as 900 years, would be immense. Just think about how much wrong people do in their lives in the first 20 or 30 years, Now imagine you have like a serial killer living to age 846. In the end, it doesn't matter how long you live for. What really matters is where your salvation comes from. Because through Jesus, we are given eternal life. And if you ask me, is way longer than 900 years.